The October air in rural Montana carried a crisp bite that turned 10-year-old Ethan Collins' cheeks a rosy red. He adjusted his blue wool hat, pulling it lower over his ears as he hiked through the dense pine forest behind his family's newly purchased farmhouse. Their move from bustling Chicago to this remote stretch of wilderness had been his parents' idea of a fresh start, his father leaving behind a stressful finance career for a position at the local university's astronomy department. "Come on, Rusty," Ethan called to his golden retriever, who bounded ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging with unbridled excitement. The dog was the one constant in Ethan's life amidst the upheaval of the move, the new school, and the endless acres of unfamiliar terrain that now surrounded their home. Ethan glanced at his watch, a gift from his grandfather before they left Chicago, and realized he had wandered farther than intended. The afternoon sun was already beginning its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the trees. "Maybe we should head back, boy," he said, more to himself than to Rusty. But the dog had other plans, suddenly alert and staring intently at something in the distance before darting off the trail. "Rusty! Come back!" Ethan shouted, breaking into a run. The forest floor crunched beneath his hiking boots as he followed the flash of golden fur weaving between trees. His backpack bounced against his spine, the water bottle inside sloshing with each stride. When he finally caught up, Rusty was standing at the edge of a clearing he didn't recognize. The dog's ears were perked forward, his posture tense and alert. "What is it, boy?" Ethan panted, resting a hand on Rusty's back. That's when he noticed the landscape before him, a wide meadow he had never seen before, surrounded by unfamiliar ridgelines. With a sinking feeling, Ethan realized he had no idea where they were. He pulled out his phone to check the GPS, only to find no service bars. The compass app opened, but without knowing which direction home lay, it was of little help. A flutter of panic rose in his chest. "We need to find our way back before dark," he told Rusty, trying to keep his voice steady. Turning around, he attempted to retrace their steps, but the forest looked different from this angle. Pine trees stretched in every direction, identical in the fading light. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature dropped quickly. Ethan zipped his jacket up to his chin and pulled a small flashlight from his backpack. His parents wouldn't start worrying for another hour. He had permission to explore until dinner, but they'd expect him back by then. "Think, Ethan," he muttered to himself. His father had taught him basics about navigation. The sun sets in the west, moss grows on the north side of trees. But in the growing darkness, these clues were becoming harder to discern. As twilight settled over the forest, the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Ethan remembered his father pointing out constellations their first night in Montana, marveling at how clearly they could see the stars away from city lights. Maybe he could navigate by them? He found the North Star just as his father had shown him and was about to head in what he hoped was the right direction when a sudden streak of light blazed across the darkening sky, a brilliant trail of fire, too large and close to be an ordinary shooting star. Ethan stood transfixed, watching the object disappear behind a ridge about a half-mile away. A moment later, a dull thud echoed through the valley. "Did you see that, Rusty?" Ethan whispered, heart racing. The dog whined, tail no longer wagging. As full darkness descended, the reality of their situation settled on Ethan's shoulders. They were lost in an unfamiliar forest, night was falling, and something had just crashed in the distance. Fear mixed with curiosity in his chest as he made a decision. "Come on, boy. Let's find somewhere safe for the night, and in the morning, we can try to find our way home." He thought of his parents and the worry that would soon consume them, and his throat tightened. "They'll come looking for us, I know they will." Finding a cluster of large boulders that offered some shelter from the wind, Ethan settled in with Rusty pressed against him for warmth. He took stock of his resources, a half-full water bottle, an apple, a granola bar, his flashlight, a small pocket knife, and his father's lightweight emergency blanket that he always insisted Ethan carry. As he wrapped the reflective blanket around both himself and Rusty, Ethan's mind kept returning to that trail of fire in the sky and what it might mean. Whatever tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing for certain: they were in for more than just a simple hike back home. Ethan awoke to Rusty's wet nose nudging his cheek and the first pale light of dawn filtering through the pine branches. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind before the previous day's events rushed back: the hike, getting lost, the fiery object streaking across the sky. His back ached from sleeping against the boulder, and a chill had seeped into his bones despite Rusty's warmth and the emergency blanket. Carefully folding the blanket back into his backpack, Ethan stood and stretched his stiff limbs. "Morning, boy," he said, his voice hoarse. Rusty wagged his tail, seemingly unaffected by their night in the wilderness. Ethan checked his watch: 6:17 a.m. His parents would have been searching for hours already, perhaps even through the night. He pulled out his phone again, hoping for a signal, but the screen showed only a rapidly draining battery and no service. Turning it off to conserve what little power remained, Ethan took stock of their surroundings in the clear morning light. The forest looked less menacing now, bathed in golden sunlight rather than shadows. Birds called to one another overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the pine needles. Ethan took a small sip of water and broke off half of his granola bar, sharing a portion with Rusty. "We need to find help or get to higher ground for a signal," he told the dog, who watched him with attentive brown eyes. "But first..." His gaze drifted toward the ridge where he'd seen the object disappear the night before. Curiosity tugged at him, a momentary distraction from the gravity of being lost. Maybe it was a meteorite, he mused, remembering his father's lectures on space debris entering Earth's atmosphere. Dad would want to know about it. Making a decision, Ethan shouldered his backpack and began walking toward the ridge, Rusty trotting alongside him. The terrain grew steeper as they approached, requiring Ethan to grab onto tree trunks for support as he climbed. By the time they reached the top, the sun had fully risen, casting long morning shadows across the valley below. Ethan's breath caught in his throat at the unexpected vista. From this vantage point, he could see for miles, including a small town nestled in the distance that he didn't recognize. More importantly, he spotted a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the forest that had to be a highway. "Look, Rusty. Civilization." The realization that help might be within reach sent a surge of hope through him. But before heading toward the road, Ethan turned his attention to the other side of the ridge, scanning for any sign of the object he'd seen fall. The opposite slope descended into a small, hidden valley, and there, about 300 yards down, something had clearly disturbed the landscape. A narrow trail of broken trees and scorched earth led to what appeared to be a shallow impact crater. Curiosity overcame caution. "Let's check it out, Rusty. Quick look, then we'll head for the road." They made their way down the slope carefully, Ethan's heart pounding with each step. As they drew closer to the impact site, Rusty's behavior changed, his ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What's wrong, boy?" Ethan asked, slowing his approach. The impact zone was smaller than Ethan had expected, maybe 15 feet across, with the surrounding vegetation charred and flattened. In the center lay not a meteorite as he'd imagined, but a metallic object about the size of a microwave oven, partially buried in the disturbed soil. Its surface was scorched black in places but still reflected the morning sunlight from areas that remained polished. Geometric patterns etched into the metal caught Ethan's eye, not random burn marks, but precise, intentional designs. "That's not a meteorite," Ethan whispered, stopping several yards away. Every sci-fi movie he'd ever watched flashed through his mind, but the rational part of him, the part influenced by his scientist father, sought more practical explanations. "Maybe it's a satellite part or something from the space station?" Rusty's growl deepened as they inched closer, and Ethan placed a reassuring hand on the dog's head. "It's okay, boy. We're just looking." Upon closer inspection, Ethan noticed something even more puzzling: no government markings, no NASA logo, nothing to identify its origin. Just the strange, intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly in the changing light. Rusty suddenly barked and darted forward, sniffing intently at the ground near the object. Ethan followed cautiously, noticing for the first time a trail leading away from the crash site, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and what looked disturbingly like footprints. Small, unusual footprints. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature ran down Ethan's spine. Whatever had been inside that object hadn't stayed there. "Rusty, come back," Ethan called, his voice barely above a whisper. The dog ignored him, nose to the ground, following the trail with the intensity of a hunting hound. Before Ethan could grab Rusty's collar, the dog took off into the underbrush, pursuing whatever scent he had discovered. "Rusty!" Ethan shouted, fear replacing caution. He plunged after his dog, branches whipping at his face as he ran. He found Rusty about 50 yards away, standing rigid, staring intently at something beneath a fallen log. The dog wasn't growling anymore but watching with his head cocked to one side in what seemed like curiosity rather than aggression. Heart pounding, Ethan slowly approached. "What did you find, boy?" As he knelt beside Rusty and peered under the log, Ethan's world shifted irrevocably. There, huddled in the shadows, was something he could never have imagined, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe and his place within it. The first thing Ethan noticed was the eyes, large, dark, and unmistakably intelligent. They blinked at him from the shadows beneath the fallen log, reflecting a mixture of fear and curiosity that mirrored his own. His breath caught in his throat as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It wasn't an animal, at least not any he'd ever encountered in his father's nature books or science documentaries. It was approximately the size of a small dog, with a slender body covered in what appeared to be a close-fitting suit of some silvery blue material. "Hello?" Ethan whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. The creature flinched at the sound but didn't retreat further. Instead, it extended a delicate, four-fingered hand in what seemed like a gesture of peace. Rusty, to Ethan's amazement, had stopped growling entirely and now sat on his haunches, tail swishing gently against the forest floor. "You're not afraid of it?" Ethan asked the dog, who looked up at him with calm eyes. The creature made a soft chirping sound, reminiscent of a cricket but more melodic. When it moved slightly, Ethan noticed it was injured, a dark fluid that might have been blood seeped from a tear in its suit near what appeared to be its shoulder. Compassion overrode fear. Whatever this being was, it was hurt and hiding, not threatening them. Slowly, Ethan unslung his backpack and retrieved his water bottle. "Are you thirsty?" he asked, unscrewing the cap and cautiously extending the bottle. The creature regarded it for a moment before reaching out with those slender fingers and taking it. To Ethan's surprise, it seemed to understand the concept immediately, bringing the bottle to what must have been its mouth, concealed within the helmet-like structure of its head. After drinking, it returned the bottle and made another series of chirping sounds, different this time, almost like a question. "I don't understand," Ethan said, shaking his head. The creature tilted its head, then slowly emerged from beneath the log, revealing its full form. It stood about 3 feet tall, with thin limbs and a slightly disproportionate head, larger than would be expected for its body size. Its movements were deliberate and graceful despite the apparent injury. Rusty nudged the creature gently with his nose, and to Ethan's astonishment, it reached out and stroked the dog's head in a gesture that seemed almost human. "You're intelligent," Ethan whispered. "Really intelligent." The reality of the situation began to sink in. The object on the ridge wasn't space junk or a satellite, it was some kind of craft. And this being was its pilot or passenger. Ethan had found an actual extraterrestrial life form. His first instinct was to run home and tell everyone, but as he watched the injured creature attempting to communicate with him, a more sobering thought took hold. What would happen to it if he told? Images from movies and TV shows flashed through his mind: government agents in hazmat suits, scientists with needles and scalpels, secret facilities where specimens were studied. The creature chirped again, then pointed toward the sky, then back to the ridge where its craft had crashed. "You want to go back to your ship?" Ethan guessed. The being nodded, an unmistakably affirmative human gesture that sent another shock through Ethan. It had either learned this from observing humans or, more incredibly, such gestures were universal. "You're hurt though," Ethan said, pointing to the creature's injury. The being looked down at its wound, then reached into a compartment in its suit and withdrew something that resembled a small, metallic patch. It applied this to the damaged area, and before Ethan's eyes, the patch seemed to meld with the surrounding material, stopping the flow of the dark fluid. "That's amazing," Ethan breathed. "Self-healing technology." His mind raced with questions. Where had it come from? Why was it here? How long had its kind been visiting Earth? But more pressing concerns took precedence. They were both still lost in the wilderness, and Ethan's parents would be frantic by now. "I'm lost," Ethan explained, using hand gestures to emphasize his words. "And you're, well, crashed. Maybe we can help each other?" The creature seemed to consider this, then made a series of movements that Ethan interpreted as agreement. It pointed to itself and made a sound that might have been its name, a melodious trill that Ethan couldn't hope to reproduce. "I'll call you Trip," Ethan decided. "Because you're on a trip to Earth. I'm Ethan, and this is Rusty." He pointed to himself and then to the dog. Trip repeated "D" then, in a voice that sounded like wind chimes, the first recognizable English Ethan had heard from it. "You can learn our language," Ethan said, eyes widening. "That's incredible." As the morning sun climbed higher, Ethan faced a series of impossible choices. His parents and likely a search party were looking for him. The nearest road might lead to help, but it would also mean exposing Trip to whoever he encountered. The crashed craft contained who knew what kind of technology that had allowed a being to travel between stars. "We should go back to your ship first," Ethan decided. "Maybe there's a way to fix it, or at least get some supplies." Trip nodded again, pointing back up the ridge with renewed purpose. Gathering his courage and what remained of his provisions, Ethan shouldered his backpack and gestured for Trip to lead the way. As they began their climb back to the crash site, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter in the Montana wilderness was just the beginning of something much bigger than his young mind could comprehend. One thing was certain, the world as he understood it had changed forever. The climb back to the ridge was more difficult than Ethan had anticipated. Trip, despite having healed its wound, moved with a slight limp, occasionally pausing to rest against a tree trunk. Rusty stayed close, as if appointed the extraterrestrial's personal guardian. "Are you sure you're okay?" Ethan asked when they stopped at a small stream. He cupped his hands to offer Trip water, but the being declined with a gesture, instead pulling what looked like a thin metal straw from another compartment in its suit. It dipped this into the stream, and Ethan watched in fascination as the water seemed to be analyzed before Trip took a small sip. "Smart," Ethan nodded. "You're testing if it's safe." By the time they reached the crash site, the sun had risen high above the trees. In daylight, the craft looked both more and less alien than Ethan had imagined. Its smooth exterior reminded him of the high-tech drones his father sometimes used for atmospheric research, yet the material wasn't like any metal he recognized. It seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, creating an iridescent effect that shifted as he moved around it. Trip approached the craft and placed its hand on what appeared to be a seamless section of the hull. A soft humming sound emanated from within, and a portion of the surface retracted, revealing an entrance barely large enough for Ethan to crawl through. "Whoa," he breathed, taking an instinctive step backward. "That's your ship?" Trip made an affirmative chirp and gestured for Ethan to follow, disappearing inside the opening. Rusty whined, clearly unwilling to enter the strange vessel. "Stay here, boy," Ethan instructed, patting the dog's head. "Guard the entrance." Rusty settled into a watchful position as Ethan gathered his courage and crawled into the craft. Inside, the space was surprisingly larger than the exterior suggested, not cavernous, but comfortable enough for Ethan to stand upright. Soft, ambient light emanated from the walls themselves, illuminating what he could only describe as a cockpit, though unlike any aircraft he'd ever seen. There were no conventional controls, no steering wheel, joysticks, or buttons, just smooth surfaces with those same geometric patterns he'd noticed on the exterior. Trip was already seated before one such panel, its slender fingers dancing across the symbols, which glowed in response to each touch. "It's like your ship is alive," Ethan said, mesmerized by the interaction. Trip made a series of sounds that somehow conveyed agreement, then pointed to a small object resembling a headband resting on what might have been a second seat. Ethan understood the invitation but hesitated. "You want me to put that on?" Trip nodded, then touched its own head where a similar device was integrated into its helmet. The meaning was clear, it was some kind of communication device. With trembling fingers, Ethan lifted the headband and slowly placed it on his forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a gentle warmth spread across his scalp, and suddenly, Trip's chirping sounds began to form patterns in his mind, not quite words, but concepts, emotions, images that constructed meaning. "Understand now," came the first clear thought, not spoken aloud but formed directly in Ethan's consciousness. "I can hear you. Or feel you, I guess," Ethan gasped. "In my head." Neural interface, translation matrix, adaptive learning, the concepts flowed faster than Trip could transmit them clearly, but the essence was understandable. The device was linking their minds, using Ethan's own language center to translate Trip's thoughts. "This is incredible," Ethan said, touching the headband. "But why are you here? Why Earth?" Trip's response came as a series of images: stars, planets, a journey of immense distance, a mission of exploration and scientific discovery. Then came concepts that Ethan struggled to comprehend, something about anomalous readings, a deviation from planned trajectory, and system failures that led to the crash. Not hostile, observers only, many years, the fragments conveyed that Trip's people had been studying Earth for generations, always from a distance, never interfacing directly with humans. "Until now," Ethan said. "Until me. Unprecedented situation, emergency, need to repair, return." The concern in Trip's thoughts was palpable. "What do you need to repair your ship?" Ethan asked. The answer came as technical concepts beyond Ethan's understanding, but among them was a clear image of a specific mineral, something crystalline with unusual properties. "Power source damaged, replacement possible, local materials," Trip conveyed, showing Ethan a mental image of what looked like a cave or mine. Outside, Rusty suddenly began barking, not his playful bark, but the sharp, alert sound he made when strangers approached. Ethan quickly removed the headband, the connection with Trip severing instantly. "Someone's coming," he whispered, crawling to the entrance and peering out. Through the trees, he could make out distant figures moving through the forest, at least 3 people, and what looked like another dog. The search party. His heart raced with conflicting emotions, relief at being found, fear for what might happen to Trip. He turned back to the alien, who seemed to understand the situation without the neural interface. "Those are people looking for me," Ethan explained anyway, pointing outside. "My family, probably. They can help us, but..." Trip made a gesture that somehow conveyed understanding and apprehension simultaneously. "I don't think we should tell them about you," Ethan decided, the weight of the decision heavy on his young shoulders. "Not yet. I've seen enough movies to know what might happen." Rusty's barking grew more insistent. The search party was getting closer. "We need a plan," Ethan said, thinking quickly. "I'll go to them, tell them I got lost. Then tonight, I'll sneak out and come back to help you find what you need to repair your ship." Trip tilted its head, those large eyes blinking slowly. "I promise," Ethan said firmly. "I'll come back." As he prepared to leave the craft, Trip touched his arm lightly, then removed something from another compartment in its suit, a small, crystalline object that pulsed with a soft blue light. "Locator, find way back," came the impression, even without the headband. Ethan nodded, pocketing the device. Tonight, he promised again, before slipping out of the craft and back into the forest with Rusty at his heels, just as the first calls of Ethan. "Ethan, are you out there?" reached his ears. "Ethan. Thank God." His father's voice broke with emotion as he emerged from the trees, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Behind him came two local forest rangers and their search dog, a German shepherd who immediately began sniffing curiously at Rusty. "Dad!" Ethan called, running forward as his father dropped to his knees and embraced him tightly. "We've been searching all night," his father said, his voice muffled against Ethan's hair. He pulled back, examining his son with reddened eyes. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Ethan had prepared his story on the short walk down from the ridge, close enough to the truth to be believable, minus any mention of alien spacecraft or beings from another world. "I got lost tracking a deer with Rusty," he explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "It got dark so fast, and my phone died. I found some shelter for the night and tried to find my way back this morning." One of the rangers, a woman with short gray hair and weathered skin, stepped forward. "You're a lucky young man. These mountains are no place for solo exploration, especially for someone new to the area." "I know, I'm sorry," Ethan said, genuinely regretful about the worry he'd caused. "I thought I knew the way back, but everything started to look the same." "The important thing is you're safe," his father said, standing and keeping one hand firmly on Ethan's shoulder, as if afraid he might disappear again. "Your mother's coordinating with another search team on the east side of the property. We need to radio them immediately." As one of the rangers used her radio to relay the good news, Ethan's father knelt again, looking him in the eye. "Were you warm enough? Did you have food and water?" "I had my emergency blanket like you taught me," Ethan replied. "And some water and granola bars. Rusty helped keep me warm." His father nodded approvingly, though concern still etched his features. "Good thinking. But Ethan, promise me you won't go exploring that far without an adult again." "Your mother and I were beside ourselves." Guilt knotted in Ethan's stomach, not just for the worry he'd caused, but for the lies he was already telling and the promise he was about to make and break. "I promise, Dad. No more solo adventures. Except, of course, for the one he was planning for that very night." The journey home took nearly 2 hours, much of it spent listening to his father and the rangers discuss the dangers of the wilderness and the importance of proper preparation. Ethan nodded at all the right moments, but his mind was elsewhere, reviewing what he'd learned from Trip, planning his return to the crash site, wondering about the crystalline material the alien needed. When they finally reached the farmhouse, his mother was waiting on the porch, her face tear-streaked and pale. She ran to meet them, crushing Ethan in an embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't. "Don't you ever," she began, but couldn't finish, just holding him tighter. "I'm sorry, Mom," Ethan said, genuine remorse in his voice. "I won't do it again." After what felt like an eternity of explanations, reassurances, and promises, Ethan was finally allowed to shower and change into clean clothes. The hot water revived his tired muscles, but did little to quiet the tumult in his mind. He touched the small crystalline locator in his pocket, reassuring himself it was still there, his connection to Trip, proof that he hadn't imagined everything. At dinner, his parents watched him eat with a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. His father, ever the scientist, asked detailed questions about how Ethan had survived the night, while his mother simply kept reaching across the table to touch his hand, as if confirming he was really there. "I've been thinking," his father said as they finished their meal, "maybe this is an opportunity for us to explore together more. I could show you proper navigation techniques, teach you about the local flora and fauna." "I'd like that," Ethan said, and meant it, though his thoughts kept drifting to the being waiting in the damaged craft on the ridge. "And I was thinking," his mother added, "that tomorrow we could drive into town, maybe get ice cream at that place we saw when we first moved in. Just spend some time together." "Sounds good," Ethan agreed, fighting the guilt rising in his throat. Would Trip still be there tomorrow? How long could the alien survive with a damaged craft? How desperate was its situation? After dinner, his parents insisted he go to bed early to recover from his ordeal. Ethan didn't protest, it served his plans better anyway. He needed them to be asleep when he made his move. Lying in bed, Rusty curled at his feet, Ethan stared at his ceiling and contemplated the weight of what he was planning. He was going to sneak out, in direct violation of his promise, to help an extraterrestrial being repair its spacecraft. It sounded absurd even in his own mind, yet the memory of Trip's thoughts melding with his own via the neural interface was too vivid to dismiss. He waited, listening as the house settled into nighttime silence. His digital clock read 10:47 p.m. when he heard his parents' bedroom door close. Another hour passed before he dared to move, sliding quietly out of bed and pulling on warm clothes, his hiking boots, and a backpack hastily filled with supplies, flashlight, compass, water bottles, food, a first aid kit, and his father's small geological toolkit that might help with extracting whatever mineral Trip needed. "Come on, Rusty," he whispered, patting the dog's head. "We need to be super quiet." The golden retriever followed obediently as Ethan crept down the stairs, wincing at every creak. He left a note on the kitchen table, couldn't sleep, took Rusty for a short walk around the yard. Back soon. A precaution in case his parents woke while he was gone. As Ethan slipped out the back door into the crisp night air, the weight of his deception sat heavy on his shoulders. But the crystalline locator in his pocket pulsed with increased intensity, pointing him toward the ridge like a compass needle finding north, and he knew he had no choice but to follow where it led. The Montana night was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor that shifted and changed as clouds passed overhead. Ethan moved with as much stealth as his inexperience allowed, Rusty padding silently beside him. The crystalline locator grew warmer in his palm, pulsing with blue light that intensified as they moved in the right direction. Unlike his daylight wandering, this time Ethan had purpose and guidance. "This way, Rusty," he whispered, following a game trail that seemed to angle toward the ridge. The dog's night vision was far superior to his own, and more than once Rusty nudged him away from potentially twisted ankles or scraped shins. An hour into their journey, the trail widened into a small clearing, and Ethan paused to catch his breath and check his bearings. The locator throbbed steadily now, the blue light casting an eerie glow on his face. According to his watch, it was nearly midnight. His parents shouldn't discover his absence for hours yet, assuming they slept through the night. Just as he was about to continue, Rusty froze, ears perked forward, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered, immediately dropping into a crouch and clicking off his flashlight. A beam of light swept through the trees about 100 yards ahead, too steady to be moonlight, too powerful to be a fellow hiker's flashlight. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as the beam moved methodically across the forest, accompanied by the faint sound of voices. "Someone else is out here," he breathed, hardly daring to make a sound. "Looking for something. Or someone," his mind added. Had Trip been discovered already? Keeping low, Ethan crept forward until he could make out 3 figures moving through the trees, 2 men and a woman, dressed not in ranger uniforms but in dark clothing that blended with the night. They carried sophisticated equipment, not just flashlights, but what looked like scanning devices that beeped softly as they swept them in wide arcs before them. "Signal strongest in this direction," one of the men said, his voice carrying in the still night air. "Whatever came down, it's just beyond that ridge." Ethan's blood ran cold. They were looking for the crash site, for Trip. But how did they know? Who were these people? "Confirmed atmospheric entry at 2017 yesterday," the woman replied, consulting a tablet-like device. "Size and velocity consistent with a Class C scout vessel. If there are survivors, Command wants them secured for study." Ethan's hand tightened around the locator. These weren't random hikers or even official search and rescue. They knew what they were looking for, and they had technology sophisticated enough to track it. As silently as possible, he retreated deeper into the shadows, pulling Rusty with him. They needed to reach Trip before these strangers did. Abandoning the direct route, Ethan circled wide around the search team, adding precious minutes to his journey but avoiding detection. The locator's pulse quickened as they ascended the far side of the ridge, using a steeper but less visible approach than the one they'd taken earlier that day. By the time they reached the crest, Ethan was breathing hard, his legs burning with exertion. Below, the crash site lay in a pool of silvery moonlight, the craft's exterior absorbing and reflecting the glow in that strange, otherworldly way. Trip! Ethan called in an urgent whisper as they scrambled down to the ship. Trip, someone's coming. The craft's entrance opened silently, and Trip emerged, those large eyes somehow more luminous in the darkness. The alien seemed to assess the situation immediately, tilting its head toward the forest where the search team would soon appear. Known risk, detection systems, must hurry. The impressions came even without the neural interface, as if Trip's urgency heightened the connection between them. Who are they? Ethan asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Trip's response conveyed images of humans in similar dark clothing, laboratories, dissections of alien technology, and worse, of beings like Trip. The message was clear: these were government agents or some secret organization that had been tracking and studying extraterrestrial visitors for years. They'll hurt you, Ethan realized, his young mind grasping the implications. We need to get your ship working before they find us. Trip gestured emphatically toward the west, then made a diving motion with its hand, followed by tapping the ground. Underground? There's something underground that way? Ethan guessed. The alien nodded, then projected a clearer image into Ethan's mind, an abandoned mine shaft, not far from their location, where the crystalline material needed to repair the ship could be found. The old Sullivan mine, Ethan whispered, recognition dawning. His father had mentioned it during dinner one night, a played-out silver mine from the late 1800s, now sealed off and largely forgotten. That's where we need to go. Trip confirmed with another nod, then retreated into the craft briefly before emerging with what looked like a small backpack adapted to fit its slender frame. It contained tools and devices Ethan couldn't begin to identify. We need to hurry, Ethan said, his voice tight with urgency. They're not far behind us. Just as they prepared to leave, a faint beeping sound carried through the trees, the search team's detectors growing closer. Rusty growled, the fur along his spine rising. Concealment necessary, Trip conveyed, touching a control on its wrist. The ship's exterior shimmed and then seemed to absorb the surrounding colors and textures, blending almost perfectly with the forest floor and exposed rock. Camouflage technology, Ethan breathed. That's incredible. Trip made a quick series of movements around the perimeter of the crash site, placing small devices at intervals that pulsed briefly before going dark. Some kind of perimeter, Ethan guessed, either warning system or additional concealment. With a final adjustment to its pack, Trip gestured westward, and Ethan nodded in understanding. They would have to navigate through unfamiliar territory, in darkness, with unknown pursuers on their trail, to reach an abandoned mine that might contain the material needed to repair an alien spacecraft. As they slipped away from the crash site, Ethan's childhood fantasies of adventure had never seemed more distant from the dangerous reality now unfolding around him. This wasn't a game or a movie, lives were at stake, including that of his new, impossible friend from the stars. The journey to the Sullivan mine was a tense exercise in stealth and endurance. Ethan, Trip, and Rusty kept to the densest parts of the forest, avoiding clearings where moonlight might reveal their presence. Twice they froze as search team members passed within yards of their position, the agent's detection equipment emitting increasingly frustrated beeps as Trip's camouflage technology confused their readings. They're spreading out to cover more ground, Ethan whispered after the second close call. We need to move faster. Trip's pace increased in response, its movements remarkably fluid despite the unfamiliar terrain. The alien seemed to possess night vision superior to even Rusty's, occasionally guiding Ethan's hand away from thorny bushes or steering him around hidden depressions in the forest floor. By the time the first hint of pre-dawn gray touched the eastern sky, they had reached the western slope of a smaller ridge that bordered the property where the Sullivan mine had once operated. Ethan's legs ached, and his eyelids felt heavy with exhaustion, but the urgency of their mission kept him moving forward. "It should be just beyond those rocks," he said, pointing to a formation of limestone that jutted from the hillside. His father had shown him old mining maps of the area during one of their science discussions, tracing the veins of silver and other minerals that had drawn prospectors to Montana in the first place. As they approached, Rusty suddenly stiffened, nose working the air. He darted forward, disappearing around the rock formation before Ethan could call him back. "Rusty! Wait!" Ethan hissed, hurrying after the dog with Trip close behind. They rounded the corner to find Rusty pawing at what appeared to be a solid rock face, whining softly. Ethan was about to pull him away when he noticed irregular markings in the stone, tool marks, weathered by over a century of Montana seasons but still discernible. This is it, he realized. The mine entrance was sealed up. Trip moved forward, running those slender fingers over the rock face with scientific precision. After a moment, the alien pointed to a narrow gap near the ground, partially obscured by brush, a drainage tunnel, perhaps, or an animal burrow that had expanded over time. "Can we get through there?" Ethan asked skeptically. It looked barely large enough for Rusty to squeeze through, let alone a human boy. Trip made a series of quick calculations, conveying to Ethan that while tight, it should be passable. The alien knelt and began clearing away debris from the opening, revealing a dark passage beyond. "I don't know," Ethan hesitated, eyeing the cramped space. "What if we get stuck?" Trip's response was a gentle pressure on his shoulder, reassurance, but also urgency. The search team wouldn't be far behind, and daylight would soon rob them of the night's concealment. With a deep breath, Ethan removed his backpack and pushed it ahead of him into the tunnel. "Rusty, stay close," he instructed, then dropped to his stomach and began to crawl into the darkness. The passage was every bit as tight as he feared, his shoulders scraped against rock on both sides, and at one point he had to exhale completely to squeeze past a narrow section. Claustrophobia clawed at the edges of his mind, but he forced himself forward, focusing on the faint glow of his flashlight reflecting off the tunnel walls ahead. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, the passage widened suddenly, and Ethan found himself able to stand in what appeared to be an old mining chamber. His flashlight beam revealed rough-hewn walls, the rotted remains of timber supports, and rusty tracks once used for ore carts. Rusty squeezed through next, shaking himself vigorously as if to remove the feel of the constricted tunnel. Trip followed last, the alien's slender build making the journey less challenging. "We made it," Ethan whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the underground chamber. "The Sullivan Mine." Trip immediately activated a device from its pack, something that projected a holographic display that Ethan recognized as a mineral analysis system of some kind. The alien moved methodically around the chamber, scanning the walls, occasionally pausing to examine a particular vein or deposit more closely. "What exactly are we looking for?" Ethan asked, shining his flashlight deeper into the mine where additional tunnels branched off in several directions. Trip projected an image into Ethan's mind, a crystalline structure with unique properties, something that could conduct and amplify energy in ways that human science had barely begun to understand. The mineral would have a distinctive blue-violet luminescence under certain light conditions. "Like a special kind of quartz?" Ethan guessed, remembering a geology lesson his father had given him. Trip's response was more complex: yes and no, similar in structure but fundamentally different in composition. The alien pointed to one of the deeper tunnels, its scanning device indicating traces of the material further in. As they ventured deeper, Ethan noticed the temperature dropping and the air growing thinner. Water dripped from the ceiling in places, forming small pools on the uneven floor. The mining tunnels twisted and branched, creating a labyrinth that would be easy to get lost in without Tripp's instruments guiding their way. After navigating 3 separate junctions, Tripp suddenly froze, its scanner emitting a series of rapid pulses. The alien pointed excitedly to a narrow fissure in the tunnel wall where something caught the light in an unusual way, not the dull gleam of pyrite or the cloudy translucence of quartz, but something that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams and transmute them into a subtle violet glow. "That's it, isn't it?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. Tripp confirmed with an emphatic nod, already retrieving specialized tools from its pack. The alien worked with precision, carefully extracting small clusters of the crystal without damaging the larger formation. Each piece was immediately placed in a containment vessel that hummed softly when sealed. While Tripp worked, Ethan explored the immediate area, his curiosity overtaking his fatigue. It was in a small alcove just off the main tunnel that he made a discovery of his own, etchings in the rock wall, crude but deliberate, depicting what could only be described as a craft similar to Tripp's, surrounded by human figures in postures of reverence. "Tripp," he called softly. "You need to see this." The alien joined him, those large eyes widening at the sight of the etchings. Not first contact, ancestors, many cycles, the concepts flowed into Ethan's mind, along with images of similar vessels visiting Earth throughout human history. "Your people have been coming here for centuries," Ethan realized. "And the miners who worked here, they saw you. They knew." The implications were staggering, proof that humanity's relationship with beings from beyond Earth wasn't new, that previous generations had encountered extraterrestrial visitors and kept the knowledge hidden, preserved only in obscure carvings and folklore. Before Ethan could process this revelation fully, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels, the scrape of movement, the crackle of radio communication, the unmistakable presence of others entering the mine. "They found us," Ethan whispered, his momentary awe replaced by renewed fear. "We need to go. Now." The search team's voices echoed through the mine tunnels, growing louder as they navigated the labyrinth with methodical precision. Ethan, Tripp, and Rusty retreated deeper into the network of passages, the alien scanning device now repurposed to map potential escape routes. "Is there another way out?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their pursuers' equipment. Tripp's response was uncertain. The scanner showed several possible exits, but whether they remained passable after a century of neglect was impossible to determine without exploration. They turned down a narrow side tunnel, Rusty leading the way with his nose close to the ground. The passage sloped upward, giving Ethan hope that it might lead to the surface. Their flashlight beams cast long, distorted shadows on the rock walls, creating illusions of movement that repeatedly caused Ethan's heart to jump into his throat. "I think we're losing them," he said after several minutes of climbing through increasingly tight passages. The voices had faded, though whether because of distance or the acoustic properties of the mine, he couldn't be sure. Just as optimism began to take hold, they reached an impasse, a cave-in that completely blocked the tunnel, massive boulders and debris filling the passage from floor to ceiling. "No," Ethan groaned, pressing his hand against the obstruction as if he could will it to disappear. "There has to be another way." Tripp scanned the blockage, then made a series of rapid calculations before pointing to a small gap near the ceiling, a space barely visible in the flashlight beam, where air might still flow between the tumbled rocks. "Up there?" Ethan asked skeptically. "It's too small, we'll never fit." But Tripp was already in motion, scaling the uneven wall with surprising agility, its slender form navigating handholds that Ethan hadn't even noticed. Upon reaching the gap, the alien probed the opening with both scanning equipment and physical examination before turning back to Ethan with a clear message. It was tight, but passable. "Okay," Ethan said, swallowing his fear. "But what about Rusty?" The dog whined softly, sensing the dilemma. Tripp considered the golden retriever for a moment, then projected an alternative. They could send Rusty back the way they had come, using his canine senses to avoid the search team, and meet him outside once they escaped through the gap. "I can't leave him," Ethan protested. "What if they catch him? What if he can't find us?" A faint shout from deeper in the tunnels made the decision for them. The search team was closing in again. With a heavy heart, Ethan knelt beside his dog. "Rusty, go home," he commanded, pointing back the way they had come. "Go home, boy. I'll find you, I promise." The dog hesitated, loyalty warring with obedience in those soulful brown eyes. Ethan repeated the command more firmly, and with a soft whine of protest, Rusty finally turned and trotted back down the tunnel, pausing once to look over his shoulder before disappearing into the darkness. Fighting back tears, Ethan began the climb to join Trip at the gap. The alien helped guide his hands and feet to secure holds, and together they maneuvered through the narrow opening, squeezing past jagged rocks that tore at their clothing and scraped their skin. Beyond the obstruction, the passage widened again, continuing its upward slope until, finally, Ethan felt a whisper of fresh air on his face. Hope surged through his exhausted body as they rounded a bend and saw a faint glow of natural light ahead, a small opening partially concealed by vegetation. They emerged into the pale light of early morning, high on the western slope of the ridge, with a sweeping view of the valley below. In the distance, Ethan could just make out the roof of his family's farmhouse, a tiny speck of civilization in the vast wilderness. "We made it," he breathed, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. Trip was already examining the crystals they had collected, confirming through some unseen analysis that they would serve the intended purpose. The alien's posture conveyed satisfaction and gratitude. "Now we just need to get back to your ship without being spotted," Ethan said, scanning the forest for any sign of the search team. "And we need to find Rusty." As if summoned by his name, a familiar bark echoed from below, and Ethan spotted the golden blur of his dog racing up the slope toward them, tail wagging with unmistakable joy. "Rusty!" Ethan called, dropping to his knees to embrace the dog as he arrived. "How did you find us so quickly?" The answer came not from Rusty but from behind him, where a figure emerged from the trees, Ethan's father, his face a complex mixture of relief, confusion, and dawning realization as his gaze shifted from his son to the unmistakably alien form of Trip. "Dad," Ethan gasped, instinctively moving to place himself between his father and Trip. "I can explain." "The atmospheric anomaly," his father said quietly, his scientist's mind clearly racing to process what he was seeing. "The unusual mineral formations in this region. The government teams that arrived last night asking questions about meteorite impacts." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Trip. "It's all connected, isn't it?" "Dad, please," Ethan began, fear for Trip overwhelming all else. "They're looking for Trip. They want to capture him, study him. We can't let that happen." To Ethan's surprise, his father nodded slowly. "I know." "You know?" His father knelt to be at eye level with his son. "Ethan, why do you think I left my position at the university to move us here? Why I specifically requested this remote location for my research?" He glanced at Trip with a look of profound understanding. This isn't the first time visitors have come to Montana. The pieces fell into place in Ethan's mind, his father's specialized knowledge of astronomy, his intense interest in unexplained atmospheric phenomena, the private research he conducted in his home office that he rarely discussed. "You've been studying them," Ethan whispered. "All this time." "Protecting them," his father corrected gently. "There are people in the scientific community who believe, as I do, that knowledge should be shared, not exploited. That contact, when it comes, should be on mutual terms." He extended a hand cautiously toward Trip. "And it seems that day has come sooner than I expected." Trip regarded the offered hand for a moment before reaching out to complete the gesture, two sentient beings from different worlds connected by a simple touch. "We need to get Trip back to the ship," Ethan explained. "The crystals we found can repair it." His father nodded decisively. "Then we'd better hurry. I can help." He looked at his son with newfound respect. "You've done something remarkable here, Ethan. Something that could change everything we think we know about our place in the universe." As they made their way back toward the crash site, with Rusty trotting happily beside them and the morning sun cresting over the mountains, Ethan felt the weight of extraordinary possibility settle upon his young shoulders, not a burden, but a gift. A shared secret that would bind father and son, human and alien, earth and stars in ways he was only beginning to understand. The lost kid who had seen a trail of fire across the sky had found something far greater than his way home. He had found a truth that had been waiting, hidden in plain sight, for someone brave enough, or perhaps innocent enough, to embrace it without fear. And in doing so, he had indeed changed everything. If you've made it this far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave us a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating content like this. Thank you for being here with us.